Ooh, a spicy question. I
because
love
the writing is sort of everything, right? Like you kind of can fix plot holes, but if the writing isn't
So some
there,
readers love that, and some readers are like, but I wanted more of this. So it's kind of a gamble.
Hello and welcome back to the Right and Wrong podcast. With me today is an author who has lived all over the world, but currently resides in Chicago, where he teaches creative writing at Loyola University. He's a fiction editor at another Chicago magazine and now a published author with his debut novel coming out earlier this year. It's Raghav Rao. Hello, welcome.
Hi, Jamie. Glad to be here.
Great to have you on. Let's jump right in with your debut novel, Missy. Tell us a little bit about it.
Absolutely. So Missy is about an extraordinary woman. She begins her life as Savi in a convent in southern India in Madras. And she's a quick learner, and she manages to get a governess position on a rural estate. But some events transpire, and she's forced to run away, and she becomes a illegal migrant to the United States, where she reinvents herself as Missy, and she becomes this owner and proprietor of a driving school in West Side Chicago, and everything seems to be going well. She has 2 daughters, and her life, she has a lot of self-determination, and then the past returns in the form of a student who appears at her driving school. And that's the story. And then she has to deal with the subsequent fallout of that. So that's the story.
Yeah, it sounds so interesting. It's always great to sort of span across multiple cultures in a story, and then that kind of adds on to the past is catching up with you kind of subplot. I just do want to ask, within the context, what is the role of a governess within this kind of context?
I would say that, in India, and writing about domestic service is integral to writing about India because of our very stratified class system, which, there is a lot of people employ domestic help. And within that domestic help context, there are many strata. So, for example, drivers will have a different, chauffeurs and drivers have a different status than governesses, who have a different status than ayahs, who may have a different status than someone who's cleaning, or someone who's a gardener. So domestic help have a very, there's an understanding of their hierarchy, and a governess is placed quite high because they speak English, they have some level of formal education. They're not just caregivers, but are also imparting knowledge. And so a governess would be a reasonably elevated position within the domestic service context of a big household in India.
Okay. And then all of that kind of experience and knowledge that she's gained through that kind of role gets transferred into her kind of integrating into the US as Missy.
Absolutely. So when she comes to America, she has a much easier time than her husband, who doesn't know English, and at least not to the same level, or has to learn it. And so she has a much easier time reinventing herself and giving herself a new identity and taking to this new culture because of her, you're right, her prior education. And exactly.
And people often say that the debut novel of an author is often the sort of closest to them, as in the most sort of biographical. I know that I think I'm right in saying that you have lived in LA. You've also lived in Mumbai. I think it said online that you lived in London for a bit.
Yep.
Currently in Chicago. How much of that kind of your kind of own experience sort of migrating between countries has gone into this?
Massively so. I think it's not a neat biographical mapping, because obviously this is a woman from very different circumstances, but the rhyming nature of the migratory experiences, it certainly rhymes with my life. So 100% massive. In what ways? I think it's just in sort of subtle perceptions rather than in massive life events.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. It's more like the sort of subtle ways with which you're treated differently when you move between different cultures, as opposed to like you were in a specific like car accident or something, and then that's exactly what's happened in the book.
Precisely. And I think, in the Jungian idea, like a single work represents many different facets of one identity. So I think that I use different characters to explore different conflicts I may be having between India and the US, tradition versus modernity. It's basically dilemmas that I face or have faced. And then these characters embody them and live them out, even if like you said, the life events may be highly dramatized for to create an interesting, propulsive, commercially viable book. But their dilemmas are they are biographic.
Yeah, and in terms of the sort of academia and the study of creative writing, you are someone that teaches at university. You've been very involved with writing and other sort of literary pursuits to that nature. It must have been, is it kind of a magical moment for you for this book to have been published and is now kind of exist out in the world? You have your debut novel and lots of people are reading it.
Yeah, I mean, magical, the culmination of a lot of work, immense gratitude to so many people who have supported me. It is totally everything that I hoped it would be. I think I pinned a lot of, perhaps too much, on getting this debut novel out into the world. Yeah. And I thought that, you're not supposed to over-fixate on external outcomes for self-love, right? You're supposed to, focus on the process, do your part. It's statistically a difficult game. And if it happens, great. And if it doesn't, it's okay. But the truth is, it has been a huge weight off my shoulders.
Okay. So it sounds like you knew the kind of healthy way to approach this, but you were sort of fighting your own instincts to maintain that.
Absolutely. That war is a constant. And, I think from having listened to your podcast and having spoken to other writers, I think a lot of people live with that struggle. We want external validation, but you can't also, it can't be the motor for one's life either, but some degree of it is okay. We're social animals, and it's okay to want to be seen by your fellows as worthy and as contributing something to society. So yeah, I'm trying to balance the idea that I am enough and self-sufficient without producing work, and also the fact that I feel as though I must produce at all times.
That sounds great. I mean, just the kind of self-awareness to know that you have that struggle is I think a really good thing. So publishing a novel, has this always been a dream for you? Has this been something that's been a long time in the making? Yeah,
it has been. And when I was little, I wrote fan fiction for the Redwall series, Brian Jacques, like the little anthropomorphized animals and who like fight battles, and I loved that stuff, and I wrote fan fiction, and I honestly repressed that memory for maybe a decade, and I just moved on with my life, thinking that wanting to be a writer was juvenile, dilettantish, embarrassing. I went to college in America to become an investment banker. And I think it's almost an indictment of our society's values that I thought that was somehow more socially acceptable than being a writer. But I told everyone I wanted to be an investment banker. And then I ended up at uni just studying English literature. So it didn't really materialize. I went into advertising. Again, I just kept course correcting to writing, and eventually I said, okay, I think I need to commit to this, and so I did, and I got my MFA, and I love teaching, and it makes me a better writer. So I know a lot of writers find their teaching duties cumbersome or get in the way of writing. For me, it just makes me more likely to do my part if I have to turn up to my students the next day and ask them to do their part. So yeah, but it's definitely been a long time in the making, and a lifelong dream. Absolutely. Yeah.
It sounds like you said, it's been a long time in the making. It sounds like you probably have you written many manuscripts before came to Missy?
Yeah. And I would say many, probably two finished novels before I finished Missy. So the first finished novel was what I used to get into my MFA program. And then the second finished novel got me my agent. And then very similar to the guest you had on a few weeks ago, Dave Goodman, basically I rewrote, I wrote another novel on spec for my agent based on the previous. And that's how Missy came into being.
Oh, I see. And so two sort of finished novels. How many unfinished novels do you think there were?
Yeah, I don't know, and that's just a sandbox, a playground for learning. So I think fondly on however many there are.
Yeah, because I think it's easy for writers to sort of think, oh no, I can't stop writing this. It will be such a waste of time. But I think there's something very healthy about sort of having a manuscript that you're only maybe a few thousand words into and saying, this has been a useful exercise, but this isn't going to go any further. Yeah,
I think there's many ideas that appear to be novels, but are really not. Mm-hmm. They have the shape of novels, but they don't have the propulsion of a novel. And what that means is often if it's a fully finished thought, it's not really a good novel. Like the novel needs to have room for maneuver, exploration. And I think sometimes we think of a premise which is actually a fully finished thought. And then you sit down and you might get a few thousand words before you realize the thing was dead before it got started. And what is often a better novel is something that is only a half thought is the better novel.
Yeah, because then you can sort of discover the second half whilst you're writing it, and also as a reader, then it doesn't the question isn't answered in the sort of title in many ways.
Precisely.
I mean, that's kind of applicable to, now I think about it, when you think about sort of science fiction and like the kind of great short science fiction, and those are obviously all concepts very neatly kind of put together, but it works in a short story format, but it would be hard to string those out into full-length novels.
Yeah, and I've heard you reference Cixin Liu on this podcast and Three Body Problem, and that is such a great novel series, but it's almost a series of fully finished thoughts and little concept pieces that manage to be strung together across a narrative arc. But you're right, when you have a finished thought, a short form is a better vehicle for that finished thought, I think. And for exploration, discovery, the propulsive nature of plot, where one thing leads to another, I think the novel, they're stillborn, or if they're completed, they don't get off the ground. The thought.
Yeah, because I guess it's less an exploration of an idea, because you know exactly the sort of exact size and kind of trajectory of that idea, and it just exists there already. So you're like, okay, I'm just writing around this as opposed to writing towards it.
And it'll feel stilted. And I know this because I've had that experience, and I'm sure other writers have, where they sit down and it's just too fully formed to go anywhere. And you're like, oh, this is done at 3,000 words, but it's not even a story, because it's just a full. Oh, I see this world, or I know this person, but there's nowhere to go with it. And I should find something where there's a question, and then maybe I can follow that question somewhere.
Yeah, exactly. Interesting discussion for sure. I'd love to talk a bit about your literary agent. So you did the MFA. That was the first novel that you had written, and then you wrote the second novel whilst you were doing that course. At what point did you sign with your agent Priya Doraiswamy, of Lotus Lane Literary?
So I finished my program in the summer of 2019, at which point I was close to done with my novel, but I still needed a few more months to go. So I think by the next year, I was done with my book and was ready to start in the spring querying. And I began querying, and I wanted Priya, but she was closed for submissions until for the summer, so until October. And what this meant was I had a chance to hone my querying skills, because querying is a skill and you get better at it as you go. So I'm glad that she was close to submissions, ironically, even though at the time I was very upset by that, but it turned out to be a blessing in disguise. So I started querying, and I was querying this quite bloated novel that I had written in my program. And I had heard back from agents who were, most of them ghosted me. I queried 72, which is on the higher side. Mm-hmm. And most of them ghosted me, which is normal. But several wrote back to say that they liked the writing style and would like to see my next book, but weren't really clear on why this one wasn't commercially viable. When Priya's submissions opened, I had a really good targeted letter for her. I answered all of her requirements to a T. And then she wrote back saying that basically, again, very similar to a guest you had a few weeks ago, this falls too neatly between two genres. I don't know which acquiring editors will pick it up. It's also very complicated and long for a debut, traversing 3 geographies: India, the Middle East, and the United States. That'll make it difficult to sell. So if you are, it was looking like a polite decline, and I was reading it with a heavy heart. And then towards the end, she was like, if you're willing to consider a revise and resubmit, I'd be open to it. And then she said she'd actually get on the phone with me to discuss, which is a good sign. So we got on the phone, and there she said, look, I love this, this stem, the first 20,000 words. If you can rewrite the book off and foreground this character, Savi, and make a story about her, I think I could sell that. And in the matter of days, I think 4 or 5 days, I just wrote what would become Missy and sent off a partial to her. And she's like, this is it. And then she signed me on the partial. And after that, we were off and running.
Wow. So it sounds like it was a pretty major change.
Massive. But I just said, look, this is what it is to be professional. I need to make a decision here. Am I going to be precious and an artist, or am I going to accept that this is the intersection of art and commerce, and this is an industry person with industry nous who's helping me? Everyone else up until this point hasn't let me in on why this isn't viable, but she is. And if I listen to her, I have a feeling good things can materialize. And so I did. And she was right. And not just right, absolutely spot on, with many editorial suggestions starting from that point onwards. So I'm very grateful to her, and she is instrumental in getting Missy to readers, and also for Missy being the woman she is. If I think about the women who influenced Missy during the writing of Missy, Priya is one of them. And then even my editor at Canelo, Keshni Naidu, is another. I mean, these are like really savvy, smart leaders in their industry who are moms, who have incredible energy, are also values driven. And I think that not ironically, but interestingly, my editor and my agent have somehow made it into this novel in the title character, which I think is unusual, and which is something I'm happy about.
It's obviously a very strong partnership, and you and Priya, like, it sounds like you have a very good understanding of what you're both trying to achieve, so that you can sort of come together and the sum of the parts can be greater than the individual parts.
Totally. I mean, she's really experienced. She's brought so many books to market, and I'm just smart enough to know when to listen to someone, and I'm grateful that I have that skill.
Yeah. And speaking of you mentioned your editor, the kind of the process of publishing a novel, once you and Priya had taken this on submission, did you know kind of how it all worked, or was it very much like a learning experience for you as you went through the various different stages?
Yeah, it was a learning experience. I didn't know. And especially with selling in different territories, I thought, so we went on submission. It wasn't selling in the US. I started to become nervous. I was traveling with my wife in Japan, and it was a very important trip because my wife is half Japanese. It was her first time going to Japan since she was a toddler, so in over, a couple of decades. It was a very important trip, and Priya told me, look, we need to do something. We need to like revise this book. So I remember in Japan over the course of just several days, I did an absolutely surgical revision where I removed huge sections, and like we went, all things that you're not advised to do while out on submission, create another version of the manuscript for a different editor and things like that. But I did it. I think that emotionally freed me up. I've just felt more like a professional. Like now I have different versions of this book flying around the world, some going to US editors, some going to Indian editors, some going to UK editors. I'm in this, I'm in the mix. And then it sold with Penguin Random House. I remember we were in Kyoto and it was just surreal. I was like, my book is sold with Penguin Random House. I'm in Kyoto. It's snowing. What's happening? My life, like, how has my life turned out this way? I'm so glad. And then, and I thought this is it. Like the US is going to follow now. I mean, Penguin Random House, come on. But nope, that's not what happened. My book sold in the UK, and then my US rights did not sell. For whatever reason, I think the US editors felt that the first 9-10 chapters being in India would prove a impediment to American readers. So it did not sell. And then basically, finally, in the end, I became reconciled to, all right, many books do well in Commonwealth, UK, India markets and don't sell in America. And it is what it is. So we brought Missy to market in those two, in India and the subcontinent and the UK. And now, finally, after it's been out in the world for a couple of months, we have some US interests, and I'm hopeful that it does sell. But it's definitely was something I had no idea what would happen. I didn't understand the ins and outs of the world. I thought it's like dominoes, one thing and then the next thing and then the next thing. It's not like that. Each thing requires connective tissue and work. And it's humbling.
Yeah, that's really interesting though, because obviously there's a kind of strong historical connection between England and India, but a large portion, most of this book takes place in the US. So I'm surprised that the editors wouldn't come back with at least like, oh, maybe we could reorder this to, weight it more towards the US at the start. There
was some of that, and at that point we had done so many of those flips and etc., and I think we had found the shape and architecture of the book that worked. And and Priya, we just didn't think that, reordering it would, and then it would just become too different from what had sold to UK and India. And then you would have a problem. You can't, that would be cool if like Missy in America was an entirely different story than Missy in the UK. That would be cool, but I don't know of many books that have that.
No, that's true. And then the superfans could get both editions and compare the differences.
I'd love nothing more.
We are at the point in the episode where I ship you off and maroon you on an island and ask, if you were stranded all by yourself on a desert island with a single book, which book do you hope that it would be?
I gave this a fair bit of thought and came up with a loophole answer, which is an omnibus, because I own this omnibus. So it is a real book. But it is the collected, the Carla trilogy, Tinker, Tailor, Soldier, Spy, The Honorable Schoolboy, and this is the John le Carre trilogy that follows George Smiley, and Smiley's People is the last one. And it is my, just like the book I most return to when I am looking for inspiration. I just open it to any page and I find something technical, something he's doing. Maybe he's using the settings of the scene to deepen the emotional resonance of a scene, or he's advancing time in a skillful way, or he's using dialogue to do characterization as well as advance the plot. I just feel that John le Carré, he managed to be genre, literary, propulsive, introspective, say deep things about society. He managed to do it all in a commercially viable package. And that's why, I think all of us are, living through conflict, and a spy is always in a state of internal conflict. And therefore, spy novels are really good for psychological depth. So John le Carré's Carla trilogy is what I would take on a desert island, and I don't think I need anything else. Yeah,
that's great. I wasn't expecting that, and also like the way that you talk about it so passionately. Obviously, I fully believe that this is one of the most influential books on you as a person. But that's so interesting because I wouldn't have expected a sort of clandestine spy story to be the thing that based off your debut novel. Is that something that you think you'd want to maybe try writing at some point?
Yes, I would. I would really like to. And I think that I know you'll come to future projects, but in some ways it's tricky being a ethnic or minority or non-white writer, in that to some extent I feel like with my debut I gave the market what I thought it wanted from me, if that makes sense, which was an immigrant story because I'm an immigrant, or because I have this biography in different continents and all that stuff. So I gave the market that story, and I hope I haven't pigeonholed myself as some sort of ethnic writer who just writes about spices in India. I don't want that. So I'm trying to rectify that with my next book. I'm very proud of Missy, but I also think that in some ways I was, writing to fit an unknown market niche, if that makes sense. And now I have to pivot.
Okay, right. And the pivot, you would like to be into spies?
If I would like to have a large range, and I would love to write something with espionage, spies, international skullduggery. It doesn't need to be, it doesn't need to be like government spies. It could be corporate spies too. I think that's fascinating, corporate espionage. But I like what, actually the book before Missy was a bit like that. It had an FBI agent FBI special agent in art fraud, investigating someone who was a member of the Qatari or aristocracy, and I had timed it in the lead up to the World Cup in Qatar, etc. And it was, spy fiction, just with art fraud. So I do have that in my locker. I want to come back to that, but I just want to have a wide range and not feel as though I only have to do India and Indian stories.
Yeah, and there's definitely precedent for it. Thinking of Rebecca Kwong, who has absolutely not put herself in any genre and is writing whatever kind of genre she wants to write with whatever book comes out next. So I think I think you can definitely do that.
Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed, yeah. Next up, I'd love to go into a bit about your writing process, more kind of specifically, as well as what I imagine is a wealth of experience from all of your kind of teaching and writing and things. And that will all be in the extended episode available on Patreon. I get it. It goes all the way back to what we talked about right at the beginning of the interview with the sort of constant fight between wanting external validation, but knowing that internal validation is actually much more valuable to you.
Right.
Well, that brings us to the end of the interview. Thank you so much, Raghav, for coming on the podcast and chatting with me. It's been so interesting talking to you about Missy and that book and the kind of the journey that it went on to get to publication, as well as everything that you've been doing in your writing process and style and technique. It's been awesome chatting with you.
Yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure, Jamie, and really feel like we're on the same page with this creating art, and glad to chat with someone.
Yeah, no, it's been awesome. And for anyone listening, if you want to keep up with what Raghav is doing, you can follow him on Instagram at RaghavRao_writes, or you can find his Substack, raghavrao.substack.com. To support the podcast, like, follow, and subscribe. Join the Patreon for extended episodes, and check out my other podcast, The Chosen Ones and Other Tropes. Thanks again to Raghav, and thanks to everyone listening. We will catch you on the next episode.